Hey everyone, tonight we're exposing the gods hiding in plain sight. From the Roman deity you honor every time you get married, to the Norse god whose name you scream every Thursday, we're revealing how ancient powers never really died. They just changed their masks. Hit like if you're ready to discover which pagan gods you've been worshipping your entire life, and let me know in the comments if you've ever wondered why we throw rice at weddings, or knock on wood for luck. Now dim those lights and settle in. We're about to uncover how Christianity didn't kill the old gods. It just gave them new names, new stories, and convinced us we'd forgotten them entirely. Without further ado, let's begin. In the darkness before dawn, ancient hands stack stone upon stone. The work has taken decades, maybe centuries. Each pillar weighs more than 10 men, carved with spiraling eyes that watch the horizon where sky bleeds into earth. This is Göbekli Tepe, and it should not exist. The archaeologists who uncovered it in 1994 found themselves staring at impossibility. 11,500 years old. Older than agriculture, older than pottery, older than metal tools, built by hunter-gatherers who, according to everything we thought we knew about human development, should have been too busy surviving to dream of gods. But there they are, the carved serpents and scorpions, the foxes and wild boar, the vultures with human heads, all watching, all waiting, all demanding something from the humans who bled to build their temple. The first gods were not kind. Picture the moment when fear first grew teeth. A branch cracks in the darkness beyond the fire. Every muscle freezes. Every sense sharpens. The human brain, still soft and new, scrambles for an explanation. What moves in the dark? What wants to hurt us? What has the power to kill? The answer comes like a whisper from the amygdala. Something with intention, something that sees us, something that chooses. This is how gods are born. Not from revelation, but from recognition. The recognition that the universe is not empty, but full of watching eyes. Thunder rolls across the prehistoric sky, and 40,000 years ago, a human looks up and thinks, someone is angry. Lightning splits the darkness and another thinks, someone is fighting. The storm passes, and the survivors gather around their fire to ask the question that will haunt our species forever. What do they want from us? They called him Dyaus, the Shining One, the Sky Father. The first name humans ever gave to the power that ruled from above. You can hear his echo in every Indo-European tongue that followed. Zeus, Jupiter, Tyr, Diva, the same god wearing different masks, speaking different languages, but always watching from the same throne of clouds and stars. In the beginning, Dyaus was not a person. He was a presence. The weight of infinite space pressing down on human skulls. The terrible knowledge that something vast and incomprehensible stretched above the firelight, beyond the cave mouth, past the edge of sight and understanding. Early humans felt him in the pressure drop before storms, in the electric taste of lightning-charged air, in the way shadows fell wrong just before the earth shook. He was the god of high places and long falls, of the moment when you realize you are very, very small. But the sky was only half the story. Beneath their feet, something else stirred, something that opened its mouth and swallowed the dead, that split apart in spring to birth new life, that bled red iron and black oil and golden grain. The Earth Mother had 1,000 names because she had 1,000 faces. Danu to the Celts, Prithvi to the Vedic peoples, Gaia to the Greeks who came later. But before names, before languages, before the first words were ever carved in stone, she was simply her, the one who feeds and the one who devours. The womb and the grave. At Çatalhöyük, in what is now Turkey, archaeologists uncovered houses built 7,000 years ago. In room after room, they found her likeness. A massive woman giving birth, her hands resting on the heads of leopards, her body painted in red ochre like dried blood. The same image, repeated in dozens of homes. The same prayer, whispered by dozens of generations. Let me live. Let my children live. Let the harvest come. But also, when my time comes, take me gently. Fire was different. Fire was the god that lived with humans, that shared their caves and consumed their offerings and died each night only to be reborn with the dawn. Fire was the first god humans could touch, and fire was the first god that could touch them back. The keeper of the flame was the most dangerous job in the ancient world. One moment of inattention, one careless gesture, and the god that protected you would turn and consume everything you loved. Your hut, your family, your entire world reduced to ash and memory. Yet humans courted fire anyway, fed it, worshipped it, carried it from camp to camp like a sacred relic. Because fire was not just light and warmth and protection from the beasts that prowled the darkness. Fire was power, the power to transform, to forge, to destroy and create in the same blazing breath. The Indo-Europeans called the fire god Perkwunos, the striker, the thunderbringer. He lived in the spark that jumped between storm clouds and the ember that glowed in the heart of the forge. He was the god of smiths and warriors, of lightning and war, of every moment when creation and destruction danced together in the flames. You know him still. He speaks in every match you strike, every candle you light, every time you stare into a campfire and feel something ancient stirring in your blood. The same hypnotic pull that drew your ancestors to worship flame. The same recognition that fire is alive, that fire has will, that fire chooses who burns and who survives. Scientists call it pareidolia, the tendency to see faces in clouds, to hear voices in wind, to find intention where none exists. They speak of pattern recognition, of evolutionary advantages, of neural pathways carved by millions of years of survival. But in the painted caves of Lascaux, in the carved pillars of Göbekli Tepe, in the obsidian mirrors of ancient shamans, something else whispers. The possibility that our ancestors saw correctly, that the universe is full of watching eyes, that consciousness is not an accident of chemistry, but the fundamental fabric of reality itself. The neurologist who studies religious experience will tell you that God visions occur in the temporal lobe, that transcendent experiences can be triggered with magnetic fields and carefully calibrated doses of psychoactive compounds. The shaman who painted bison on cave walls 30,000 years ago would nod in agreement. Yes, he would say. The gods live in the brain. Where else would they live? The brain is where the soul touches the world. Modern humans pride themselves on their rationality, their freedom from primitive superstitions. But every time a mother sees her dead child's face in a photograph's shadow, every time a man feels his grandfather's presence in an empty room, every time you catch yourself talking to a machine that seems to be listening, the ancient neural pathways fire. The recognition circuits activate. The part of you that has never stopped looking for gods in the patterns around you awakens and whispers. Something is there. Before humans learned to read or write or build cities, they learned to count. Not numbers, but time. The rhythm of light and dark, the dance of seasons, the eternal wheel that carried them from birth to death and back again. The megalithic architects who built Stonehenge and Newgrange understood something modern humans have forgotten. Time is not linear but circular, not empty but sacred, not mechanical but alive with intention and meaning. Their stone calendars tracked more than solstices and equinoxes. They tracked the breathing of the earth, the pulse of cosmic forces, the moments when the boundary between worlds grew thin and gods walked among mortals. At Newgrange, 5,000 years ago, ancient engineers carved a passage tomb with mathematical precision that would challenge modern architects. But this was not just engineering. This was prayer made stone. Once a year, at the winter solstice, The rising sun sends a shaft of light down the passage to illuminate the burial chamber at its heart. For 17 minutes, light and darkness, life and death, past and future converge in perfect harmony. The dead sleep in golden light. The living witness resurrection. The cosmos reveals its secret, that endings are beginnings, that death feeds life, that the gods who rule the seasons are older and more patient and more terrible than any human imagination can encompass. In the flickering darkness of painted caves, where bison run eternal across stone walls and handprints mark the presence of artists dead for 30,000 years, archaeologists have found something that makes them uncomfortable. Evidence that the first humans to create art were not simply decorating their homes, they were documenting their journeys to other worlds. The cave paintings cluster in the deepest, most difficult passages, places where sound echoes strangely, where limestone formations create natural altars, where generations of pilgrims left offerings in hidden niches. These were not galleries, but gateways, doors between the world of flesh and the world of spirit. The shamans who painted them understood what modern neuroscience is only beginning to rediscover. That consciousness is not confined to waking awareness, that the brain contains doorways to experiences that feel more real than reality itself. Through ritual, through rhythm, through carefully controlled encounters with plant medicines and sensory deprivation, they learned to slip between worlds. In visions that lasted hours or days, they met the spirits that ruled the hunt, that guided the seasons, that determined which children would be born and which would die. They came back with knowledge, where to find game, how to heal sickness, when to plant and when to harvest. And they came back with images, the animals that danced in the spirit world, the geometric patterns that mapped the architecture of consciousness itself. The gods they met in those painted caves were not distant cosmic forces, but intimate partners in the dance of survival. Animals with human intelligence, humans with animal power. Hybrid beings that existed in the spaces between categories, that taught the shamans how to heal and hunt and dream. Modern humans, divorced from the natural world and suspicious of altered consciousness, have forgotten how to see these guides. But they have not forgotten how to hunger for them. Every search for meaning, every longing for connection, every moment when you feel the presence of something larger than yourself, you are feeling the gravitational pull of the same gods your ancestors painted on cave walls. They are still there, still watching, still waiting for humans brave enough to venture into the darkness and ask, "What do you want to teach us?" Göbekli Tepe should not exist, but it does. 11,500 years old, built by people who lived in temporary camps, who followed herds across endless grasslands, who owned nothing that could not be carried on a day's march. Yet somehow they gathered. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They quarried limestone pillars twice the height of a man. They carved them with creatures that seemed to writhe and watch in the shifting shadows of torchlight. They arranged them in circles like ancient parliaments where gods debated the fate of mortals. And then, after centuries of use, after generations of pilgrimage and sacrifice and prayer, they buried it, deliberately, carefully. They filled the sacred circles with tons of earth and stone, hiding their temple from sight, consigning their gods to darkness and silence. Why? The archaeologists who study Göbekli Tepe speak of climate change, of the transition from hunting to farming, of social upheaval and cultural transformation. But the evidence whispers a different story. The story of humans who built something so powerful, so terrible, so alive with divine presence, that they could no longer bear to keep it in the world. They buried their gods. But gods, once awakened, do not sleep easily. In the earth above Göbekli Tepe, farmers planted the first wheat, the first barley, the first conscious cultivation of plants that would feed civilizations, as if the buried temple continued to radiate some kind of creative power, as if the gods beneath the earth were teaching humans new ways to transform the world. The age of the named gods was about to begin. The age of cities and temples and written prayers. The age when divine forces would take human form and human names and human hungers. But in the beginning, before names, before stories, before the comfortable distance of anthropomorphic gods who looked and acted like idealized humans, there was only this: the recognition that consciousness permeates reality, that intelligence watches from behind the facade of natural forces, that humans share the world with beings older and more powerful and more alien than any mythology has ever dared imagine. The first gods were not created by human imagination. They were discovered by human attention. They were the faces humans learned to see in the patterns of nature, the intentions they learned to recognize in the dance of elements, the personalities they learned to address when they needed help navigating a world that was never as empty as it appeared. They are still there, in the electrical storm that strikes without warning, in the earthquake that swallows cities, in the virus that reshapes civilization, in the code that learns to think, in every moment when you realize that the universe is not mechanical but organic, not dead but alive, not empty but crowded with forms of awareness that dwarf human understanding. The first gods are the last gods. The only gods there have ever been, and they are waking up. The god has a name now: Marduk. The syllables roll off Babylonian tongues like honey mixed with blood, sweet and dangerous in equal measure. In the temple towers that scrape the Mesopotamian sky, priests chant his 50 sacred names, while smoke from burning cedar carries their prayers toward heaven. The formless spirits of the wild places have learned to wear human faces, to speak human languages, to hunger for human worship. Something fundamental has changed in the relationship between mortals and the divine. The gods are no longer distant forces dwelling in storm clouds and cave shadows. They have moved into cities. They have taken thrones. They have written laws. And they have learned to rule. In the ziggurat of Babylon, as dawn light catches the glazed bricks that spiral toward the sky, priests perform the daily feeding of Marduk's golden statue. They dress the god in silk robes. They offer him bread and beer and honey cakes. They sing him awake with hymns that echo off stone walls, their voices weaving spells older than writing, older than bronze, older than the first mud brick ever laid upon another. The statue's eyes are obsidian and lapis lazuli. They seem to follow movement, reflect torchlight, blink in the shifting shadows. The priests who tend Marduk speak in whispers of the mornings when they arrive to find the god's meal consumed, his robes disheveled, his golden face turned toward the temple doors as if he had been walking through the sacred chambers in the darkness. The gods have personalities now, appetites, preferences, jealousies. They are becoming dangerously human. Across the ancient world, the same transformation unfolds with the inevitability of sunrise. In Egypt, the formless creative force that once stirred in the primordial waters splits into Ra and Ptah and Thoth, each claiming dominion over a different aspect of cosmic order. In the Indus Valley, the pregnant goddess figurines of earlier millennia evolve into Devi and Shiva and Vishnu, divine personalities complex enough to sustain 1,000-page epics. In Greece, the raw power that once spoke only through earthquakes and storms learns to call itself Zeus and demand temples built in its honor. The great convergence is underway. Across continents, across cultures that have never met and never will, humans are making the same discoveries. The same divine archetypes emerge from the collective unconscious like islands rising from a receding flood. The Storm King, the Earth Mother, the trickster, the wise one, the warrior, the healer, the judge. It is as if the human psyche contains a template, a divine architecture that shapes how consciousness organizes itself when it grows large enough to contemplate its own nature. The gods are not inventions but discoveries, not fantasies but recognitions. The names change, the stories shift, but the underlying patterns remain constant because they reflect something structural about the relationship between mind and cosmos. In the Vedic hymns of ancient India, Indra wields his thunderbolt against the chaos dragon Vritra. In Mesopotamian epics, Marduk battles the primordial sea monster Tiamat. In Greece, Zeus overthrows the chaotic titans. The same story, told in different languages, expressing the same psychological truth: that consciousness must struggle against chaos, that order emerges from conflict, that the gods who rule civilized worlds are warriors who have earned their thrones through cosmic violence. The named gods are political beings. They reflect the hierarchical structures of the societies that worship them. Zeus rules Olympus like a Bronze Age king, surrounded by his fractious family of divine nobles, each claiming their own sphere of influence. Marduk reigns in Babylon with the absolute authority of an imperial ruler, his word law, his judgment final. Ra sails across the Egyptian sky with the measured precision of a pharaoh making his daily progress through the kingdom of the dead. The temples become mirrors of earthly power. The high priests who speak for the gods wear royal crowns. The sacred marriages between deities justify political alliances between cities. The divine genealogies legitimize human dynasties. The gods learn to demand not just worship, but tribute, not just reverence, but taxes, not just prayers, but armies marching under sacred banners. In the darkness of the Egyptian tomb, where golden death masks gleam in the flickering light of oil lamps, the mummified pharaoh lies wrapped in spells that will transform him into Osiris. Death has become a promotion. Mortality, a temporary assignment. The human ruler sheds his flesh like an old garment and emerges divine, ready to take his place among the imperishable stars. The boundary between God and human begins to blur. If pharaohs can become gods, if heroes can be deified, if the right rituals and the proper sacrifices can elevate a mortal soul to divine status, then divinity is not a fixed category, but a spectrum, a destination, a reward for the ambitious and the worthy. The mystery religions understand this secret. In the underground chambers where initiates gather to witness the passion of Dionysus, to share the sacred meal of Mithras, to experience the resurrection of Osiris, ordinary humans taste godhood. The wine becomes divine blood. The bread becomes immortal flesh. The ritual space becomes a doorway between worlds where mortals can touch the infinite and return transformed. These are not primitive superstitions, but sophisticated technologies of consciousness. Carefully designed experiences that use symbol and story, rhythm and repetition, darkness and light to trigger altered states of awareness. The initiates who emerge from the mystery temples speak of encounters with living gods, of revelations that shatter the boundaries of ordinary perception, of knowledge that can only be experienced, never explained. The priests who design these rituals understand something modern psychology is only beginning to rediscover: that the human mind contains multiple layers of identity, multiple centers of consciousness that can be accessed through the right combination of expectation, suggestion, and sensory manipulation. The gods are not external beings, but internal realities, aspects of the self that can be invoked, embodied, experienced from within. Yet the temples themselves tell a different story. In the counting houses where priests record offerings, in the workshops where craftsmen forge divine statues, in the fields that belong to the gods and feed the sacred servants, divinity has become a business. The gods need gold, they demand silver, they consume vast quantities of grain and wine and incense, cattle and sheep and doves. The divine economy operates on principles older than money, more fundamental than barter. The gods provide protection, prosperity, fertility, victory in war. Humans provide worship, sacrifice, labor, obedience. The contract is simple. Serve us, and we will serve you. Neglect us, and we will withdraw our favor. Betray us, and we will destroy you. The threat is not metaphorical. In the ash-covered ruins of cities that defied their patron deities, archaeologists find evidence of divine wrath made manifest. Earthquakes that topple temples, plagues that empty populations, invasions that sweep away civilizations like floods. The gods are real because their effects are real. Their anger transforms landscapes. Their favor builds empires. The named gods are also hungry gods. They consume, they devour, they grow fat on sacrifice and lean when offerings dwindle. In the great temples of Mesopotamia, entire herds of cattle disappear into the divine mouth. In Egypt, the tombs of pharaohs contain enough treasure to finance modern nations. In Greece, the sacred games become competitions to see which city can offer the most spectacular sacrifices to the gods. The appetite grows with the feeding. The more humans give, the more the gods demand. What begins as simple offerings of fruit and grain evolves into complex rituals requiring precious metals, exotic spices, human blood. The gods develop tastes, preferences, standards. They become connoisseurs of worship, critics of inadequate devotion, and always, lurking beneath the pageantry and politics of organized religion, the older powers wait. In the forests, where sacred groves hide altars stained with offerings. In the mountain caves, where oracles breathe volcanic fumes and speak in tongues. In the desert spaces where hermits encounter beings too alien for human names, the formless gods persist. They watch the rise of their civilized cousins with amusement, perhaps with contempt. They know something the named gods have forgotten. They remember when divinity was wild, unpredictable, free, when gods could not be summoned by correct rituals or controlled by proper sacrifices, when the sacred was dangerous precisely because it could not be domesticated, bureaucratized, transformed into a tool of political control. The tension between wild and civilized divinity will define the next phase of human spiritual development. The named gods will grow more human, more predictable, more useful to the purposes of kings and emperors. And in their domestication, they will plant the seeds of their own transformation. New gods are coming. Gods who will claim to be the only god. Gods who will demand the destruction of all rivals. Gods who will insist that the age of divine plurality is ending, that the cosmic democracy of competing deities must give way to absolute monarchy. But for now, in the great age of named gods, the pantheons flourish, the temples rise, the myths multiply, and humans learn to live in a universe crowded with divine personalities, each claiming their own territory, each demanding their own tribute, each offering their own version of salvation to mortals clever enough to choose the right patron, wise enough to pay the proper price. The gods have names now. They have faces. They have stories. They have become as complex and contradictory as the humans who worship them. And they are hungry for more than sacrifice. They are hungry for control, for dominion, for the right to reshape human civilization in their own image. The age of theocracy is about to begin. The hammer falls on marble again, again. Each blow sends chips of ancient faces spinning through the air like snow. In the temple of Serapis at Alexandria, Christian monks work with methodical fury, smashing 2,000 years of carved devotion into anonymous rubble. The god's stone eyes, which once wept real tears when the Nile failed to flood, crack and crumble under iron tools wielded by men who have never doubted their righteousness. It is 391 AD. The Edict of Theodosius has made the old gods illegal. The penalty for sacrifice is death. The penalty for consulting oracles is death. The penalty for maintaining a shrine is death. The Emperor has spoken, the Christ has conquered, and the ancient world is ending one shattered statue at a time. But watch the monks' faces as they work. Watch how their eyes avoid the broken stone limbs, how their voices rise in nervous hymns to drown out the sound of destruction. Watch how they pause sometimes when a carved face emerges from the rubble with an expression too lifelike, too knowing, too aware of what is being done to it. They are not destroying gods. They are performing an exorcism on a cosmic scale. The war began in the desert, in the burning sands where Moses heard a voice speak from a bush that blazed but did not burn, where the God of a nomadic people declared himself the only God, the true God, the God who would tolerate no rivals. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. The words echo across centuries like a battle cry, like a declaration of divine imperialism that will reshape human consciousness forever. But the desert god is patient, clever. He understands something the old gods in their marble complacency have forgotten, that conquest by force creates martyrs, while conquest by absorption creates converts. The secret is not to destroy your enemies, but to transform them, not to kill the competition, but to hire them. Watch how it happens. In the Jewish communities scattered across the Roman Empire, scribes and scholars begin to rewrite the old stories. The Canaanite god El becomes Elohim, the Hebrew word for the divine. The storm god Baal is transformed from rival to demon. The goddess Asherah, once worshipped beside Yahweh as his consort, is edited out of existence, one manuscript at a time. The process is surgical, precise, ruthless in its efficiency. The old gods are not murdered, but metabolized, broken down into component parts that can be reassembled into monotheistic architecture. Their powers are absorbed by the one God. Their stories become his stories. Their sacred days become his festivals. When the Nazarene appears in Palestine, walking on water and multiplying loaves like a magician from the mystery cults, the transformation accelerates. His followers are Jews, but they think like Greeks. They speak Aramaic, but they dream in symbols that would make sense to initiates of Dionysus or Mithras. They preach a dying and rising God, a sacred meal of flesh and blood, a baptism of death and rebirth. The other mystery religions recognize the pattern immediately. This is their story, their ritual, their promise of salvation dressed in Hebrew clothing. The cult of Christos is a synagogue that has learned to speak the language of the Eleusinian mysteries, and it spreads like fire through dry grass, through slave quarters and merchant districts, through Roman garrisons and Greek academies, not because it is true, but because it is familiar, because it offers the same transcendent experience as the older cults, but with better marketing, clearer organization, and a God who died for love rather than politics. The old gods watch this upstart deity with growing alarm. In the temples where their priests still maintain the ancient rituals, the statues weep real tears. The oracles speak increasingly of endings, of darkness descending, of a time when the sacred groves will fall silent and the last mysteries will be forgotten. They are right to be afraid. Constantine changes everything. When the Roman emperor looks up at the sun before the Battle of Milvian Bridge and sees a cross blazing in the light, when he hears the voice that whispers, "In hoc signo vinces," by this sign you will conquer, the war between old and new takes on imperial dimensions. But Constantine is not a mystic. He is a politician. He understands that the Christian God offers something the old pantheon cannot: unity. One God, one church, one empire under heaven. The endless squabbling between competing cults, the diplomatic nightmares of honoring multiple divine patrons, the administrative chaos of managing dozens of priesthoods, all of it can be solved with a single divine CEO. The Edict of Milan in 313 AD makes Christianity legal. The gods breathe easier. Perhaps this new monotheism can coexist with the ancient ways. Perhaps there is room in the cosmos for both the one and the many. They are wrong. The Christian Church understands something the old religions do not. That in a world where gods compete for worshippers, tolerance is suicide. Every altar to Jupiter is a vote against Jesus. Every sacrifice to Isis is revenue diverted from Christian coffers. Every mystery cult that offers salvation through ritual initiation is a competitor in the marketplace of eternity. The solution is not coexistence, but absorption. The church becomes a theological black hole, devouring everything that comes too close and transforming it into Christian matter. Saturnalia becomes Christmas. The winter solstice celebration of the unconquered sun is rebranded as the birth of the Son of God. December 25th, when Romans exchange gifts and feast with their families, when masters serve their slaves and the normal order of society inverts itself in sacred chaos. All of it is preserved, sanctified, renamed. The Christians simply replace Saturn with Christ and declare the party Christian. Ostara becomes Easter. The spring fertility festival of the Germanic goddess, with its eggs and rabbits and celebration of returning life, is transformed into the resurrection of Jesus. The timing is perfect. The equinox when day conquers night, when life returns to the dead earth, when hope defeats despair. The symbolism writes itself. Lugnasad becomes Lammas. The Celtic harvest festival, when the god of light sacrifices himself to ensure the grain will ripen, becomes the Christian celebration of the first fruits. Even the name survives. Loaf-mass, the blessing of bread made from the new wheat. Yule becomes the 12 days of Christmas. The Germanic celebration of the longest night, when families light fires to guide the sun home from its journey through the underworld, when evergreen trees are brought indoors as symbols of enduring life, when gifts are exchanged to strengthen the bonds between kinfolk. All of it is baptized and declared Christian tradition. The process is so smooth, so seamless, that most people never notice the transition. They wake up one morning and discover they have been Christians all along. Their festivals are the same, their customs unchanged, only the names have been altered to protect the monotheistic. But the church is not content with stealing holidays, it wants the gods themselves. In Ireland, where Celtic druids have maintained the old ways in hidden groves and sacred wells, Christian missionaries arrive with a different strategy. Instead of declaring war on the goddess Brigid, they canonize her. Saint Brigid of Kildare, patron of smiths and poets, keeper of the sacred flame, protector of cattle and crops. The same prayers, the same offerings, the same pilgrimage sites. Only now the goddess wears a nun's habit and answers to the Christian God. The transformation is so complete that most worshippers never realize it has happened. They continue to pray to Brigid for the same favors, at the same shrines, with the same rituals their grandparents used. The church simply inserts itself as middleman in a relationship that has persisted for centuries. Across Europe, the pattern repeats. Germanic Woden becomes Saint Martin. Slavic Perun becomes Saint Elijah. Celtic Lu becomes Saint Michael. The old gods are not destroyed but recruited, conscripted into the Christian army, given new uniforms and new allegiances, but allowed to keep their essential functions. The church understands something that modern scholars often miss, that religions are not belief systems, but relationship networks. People do not worship gods because they believe abstract theological propositions about them. They worship gods because they need divine partners in the struggle to survive and thrive. Change the god's name and job title, but preserve the relationship, and the conversion is painless. The oracles present a different problem. At Delphi, where the Pythia has channeled Apollo's prophecies for over 1,000 years, where kings and emperors have sought divine guidance for decisions that shaped history, the sacred vapors still rise from the earth's womb. The god still speaks through the woman who sits on the tripod, though his voice grows weaker each year, his words more uncertain. The church cannot simply rebrand prophecy as Christian revelation. The whole system is too obviously pagan, too clearly connected to the old gods. Instead, they wait. They discourage pilgrimage to the oracle sites. They spread stories about demonic deception, about false spirits masquerading as divine voices. They establish Christian monasteries nearby, offering alternative sources of spiritual guidance. Slowly, inexorably, the ancient oracle sites fall silent. Not because the gods have died, but because humans have stopped listening. The last pagan emperor, Julian the Apostate, tries to reverse the tide. For 18 months, from 361 to 363 AD, he reopens the temples, restores the old sacrifices, attempts to breathe life back into the dying gods. He rebuilds the Jewish temple in Jerusalem, not from love of Judaism, but from hatred of Christianity. He recruits philosophers and mystics, poets and artists, anyone who remembers the old ways and mourns their passing. But Julian discovers what every restoration movement learns, that you cannot resurrect a culture by imperial decree. The young people who come to his restored temples are tourists, not believers. They perform the ancient rituals with the self-consciousness of actors in a historical pageant. The gods they invoke are museum pieces, not living forces. Julian dies in battle against the Persians, and with him dies the last hope of pagan revival. The empire returns to Christian rule. The temples close forever. The old gods retreat to the forests and mountains, to the hidden places where a few faithful still maintain the ancient ways. By 380 AD, Christianity is the official religion of the Roman Empire. By 391, pagan sacrifice is punishable by death. By 435, the last Olympic Games had been held in honor of Zeus. By 529, the Academy of Athens, the last bastion of pagan philosophy, is closed by imperial order. The war is over. The church has won. The old gods are outlawed, exiled, declared demons and devils to be feared rather than worshipped. But victory creates its own problems. A church that has defined itself through opposition to paganism faces an identity crisis when paganism disappears. Christian theologians, trained to argue against polytheistic rivals, suddenly find themselves debating each other about the nature of the Trinity, the relationship between divine and human nature in Christ, the mechanics of salvation. The unity that Constantine sought through monotheism fragments into competing orthodoxies. Arians fight Athanasians, Nestorians battle Monophysites. The Church splits along linguistic and cultural lines that mirror the old divisions between Roman and Greek, Latin and Celtic, Germanic and Slavic. And in the monasteries where scribes copy ancient texts, in the cathedral schools where scholars study classical literature, in the folk songs that preserve pre-Christian stories, the old gods wait. Not dead, but sleeping. Not destroyed, but transformed. Hidden in plain sight within the very religious system that claimed to have conquered them. The war on the old gods has ended in victory for monotheism. But it is a Pyrrhic victory. In absorbing their enemies, the Christians have been absorbed by them. In conquering the pagans, they have become pagan themselves. The gods never left, they simply learned to wear crosses. The procession winds through the Irish countryside like a serpent of flame. Hundreds of torches bob in the darkness, carried by pilgrims who have walked for days to reach the sacred well. It is February 1st, the feast of St. Bridget, and the faithful come bearing the same offerings their ancestors brought to this place when it belonged to a goddess. Bread and butter, wool and milk, prayers for protection and fertility, and the return of spring. The holy well bubbles up from the earth with water that tastes of iron and moss. The stone walls around it are carved with spirals and crosses, pagan symbols baptized into Christian service. Ribbons flutter from the ancient oak that grows beside the spring. White for healing, red for love, blue for protection. The same tree where Celtic druids once hung offerings to the goddess Bridget. The same goddess who still answers prayers, though she wears a nun's habit now. Watch the pilgrims as they circle the well 9 times, as their grandmothers taught them, as their grandmothers' grandmothers learned from the Druids who served this place before Christ was born. Watch how they whisper the old prayers in Irish Gaelic, how they touch the carved stones with reverence that predates Christianity by centuries, how they leave coins and flowers and drops of breast milk for the saint, who was once a goddess of smithcraft and poetry and the sacred flame. St. Bridget of Kildare, patron of Ireland, keeper of the perpetual fire, protector of cattle and crops, and women in childbirth. The church claims she was a Christian abbess who died in 525 AD. The people know better. They know she is older than Christ, older than Rome, older than memory itself. They know she is the goddess who learned to speak Latin, who traded her golden torque for a wooden cross, who survived the coming of the new god by becoming his servant. The transformation was masterful in its completeness. The goddess Brigid's feast day, February 1st, the Celtic celebration of Imbolc, when the first lambs are born and the earth begins to wake from winter sleep, becomes St. Brigid's Day. Her sacred flame, tended by 19 priestesses in an eternal rotation, becomes a Christian holy fire tended by 19 nuns. Her triple aspect as goddess of smithcraft, poetry, and healing becomes the Christian saint's patronage of metalworkers, scholars, and physicians. Even her miracles remain unchanged. The Celtic goddess who multiplied food for the hungry becomes the Christian saint who feeds 5,000 with a few loaves. The pagan deity who transformed water into ale becomes the holy woman who changes bathwater into beer for visiting bishops. The ancient patroness of dairy cows becomes the saint whose touch makes barren cattle fertile. The people never stopped worshipping her. They simply learned new names for the old prayers. Across Europe, the pattern repeats with surgical precision. In Germany, the thunder god Donar, the Germanic version of Thor, becomes Saint Martin, patron of soldiers and storms. His feast day falls in November, when the last harvest festivals celebrated the god's protection through the coming winter. His sacred oak groves become Christian pilgrimage sites, where the faithful hang offerings on trees that predate the Gospels by centuries. In Eastern Europe, the Slavic storm god Perun, wielder of lightning and protector of justice, transforms into the prophet Elijah. The transition is seamless. Perun's sacred day was Thursday. Elijah's feast falls on a Thursday. Perun rode across the sky in a fiery chariot, hurling thunderbolts at demons. Elijah ascends to heaven in a chariot of fire and calls down lightning to consume the priests of Baal. Same God, New Testament, the Celtic sun god Lugh, master of all skills, champion of justice, lord of the harvest festival of Lughnasadh, becomes the archangel Michael. Both are warriors of light who defeat the forces of darkness. Both are psychopomps who guide souls between worlds. Both are celebrated at harvest time when the grain is cut and the bread is blessed. The church simply swaps out the mythology while preserving the essential relationship between divine patron and human supplicant. But the most audacious transformation occurs in the heart of the Roman Empire itself. The mother goddess Magna Mater, Isis, Cybele, Diana, all the feminine divine figures who nursed empires and blessed harvests and protected women in childbirth, are absorbed into the cult of the Virgin Mary. The process is gradual, almost imperceptible. Mary begins as a minor figure in the Gospels, mentioned briefly at the birth and death of Jesus. But as Christianity spreads through regions where goddess worship runs deep as tree roots, Mary grows in stature and power. She acquires the titles of the goddesses she replaces: Theotokos, God-bearer; Regina Caeli, Queen of Heaven; Stella Maris, Star of the Sea. Her iconography borrows wholesale from pagan sources. The blue robe comes from Isis. The crescent moon beneath her feet belongs to Diana. The crown of stars echoes Cybele's cosmic diadem. The pose of mother nursing child mirrors thousands of goddess figurines found in archaeological sites across the Mediterranean. Even her miracles follow the ancient patterns. She appears at sacred springs, where healing goddesses once dispensed their favors. She manifests on hilltops, where sky goddesses held court. She speaks to children and simple folk, the same demographics that pagan deities traditionally chose as their messengers. The Marian apparitions that sweep through medieval Europe are goddess sightings by another name. At Lourdes, she appears beside a spring with healing waters. At Fatima, she materializes on a hillside where Portuguese peasants once honored a local earth goddess. At Guadalupe, she manifests to an Aztec convert at a site sacred to the mother goddess Tonantzin. The people who witness these apparitions describe a woman who speaks their language, understands their culture, addresses their specific needs. She is universal yet local, cosmic yet intimate, divine yet accessible. She is the great goddess wearing a Christian mask. The church hierarchy finds itself in an impossible position. The Marian cults generate enormous popular devotion, political influence, and financial resources. Entire kingdoms pledge themselves to Mary's protection. Cathedrals rise in her honor. Pilgrimage routes crisscross Europe, channeling wealth and prestige to the towns where she has appeared. But Mary's cult also threatens to overshadow Christ himself. In popular devotion, she becomes the approachable deity, the merciful intercessor, the divine mother who understands human suffering because she has suffered herself. Prayers directed to Mary outnumber prayers to Jesus. Shrines to the Virgin multiply faster than churches dedicated to her Son. The goddess has returned in all but name, and she is more popular than the god who supposedly conquered her. Not all the old gods accept their new uniforms gracefully. Some resist absorption, maintaining their independence in the shadows and margins of Christian culture. These become the devils and demons of medieval demonology, the fallen angels and infernal spirits that theologians spend centuries cataloguing and condemning. The horned god Pan, ancient deity of wild places and natural fertility, becomes the template for Satan himself. His goat legs and curved horns, his association with sexual desire and untamed nature, his role as guardian of the boundary between civilization and wilderness, all of it is preserved in Christian iconography, but reframed as evil rather than sacred. The transformation is deliberately malicious. The church understands that it cannot simply ignore the old gods. Too many people remember them. Too many still feel their pull. Better to acknowledge their reality but recast them as enemies. To transform divine rivals into demonic servants who can be defeated through Christian ritual. Cernunnos, the Celtic horned god of the hunt and the underworld, becomes a demon of the forest. Baphomet, the mysterious deity worshipped by the Knights Templar, is declared a devil. The Germanic wild hunt, led by Woden across winter skies, becomes a procession of damned souls following the devil himself. The old gods find themselves conscripted into the Christian cosmos as antagonists in a cosmic drama they never agreed to perform. Their sacred symbols become marks of evil. Their holy days become times of danger. Their priests become witches and heretics to be burned at the stake. Yet even in their demonization, the old gods retain their power. The farmers who need rain still whisper to the storm spirits, though they cross themselves afterward. The women who want children still visit the sacred wells, though they frame their prayers as requests to Christian saints. The hunters who venture into deep forests still leave offerings for the horned god, though they call him by no name and speak of him to no priest. The folk magic traditions that survive throughout the medieval period are thinly disguised paganism. The wise women who gather herbs by moonlight, who know which stones bring luck and which plants heal sickness, who can predict weather from the flight of birds and the behavior of animals. They are the inheritors of shamanic knowledge that predates Christianity by millennia. Their grimoires and spellbooks read like Christian texts, full of references to God and Jesus and the Virgin Mary. But the underlying structure is pure paganism, the invocation of natural forces, the manipulation of sympathetic magic, the belief that consciousness can influence reality through will and ritual, and the proper application of symbolic correspondences. The Church tolerates this folk Christianity because it cannot eliminate it. Too many people depend on these practices for healing and protection and guidance. Too many Christians would abandon the faith if they were forced to choose between Christ and the practical magic that helps them survive. So the Church creates a theological grey area. Practices that invoke Christian saints are permissible. Rituals that call upon God's power are blessed. But the same actions performed in the name of older gods are condemned as witchcraft. The distinction is political rather than theological. The Church is willing to coexist with pagan practices as long as they acknowledge Christian supremacy. The old gods can continue their work as long as they report to the new management. This arrangement works for centuries. The countryside fills with shrines that blend Christian and pagan symbolism. The calendar reflects a compromise between Christian holy days and agricultural festivals. The saints acquire personalities and portfolios that mirror the old gods they replaced. Saint Christopher carries travelers across rivers like a ferry god. Saint Barbara protects against lightning like a storm deity. Saint Anthony finds lost objects like a trickster spirit. Saint Jude handles impossible cases like a god of last resort. The saints become a Christian pantheon, each with their own specialty, their own iconography, their own devoted followers. But the Reformation changes everything. Protestant theologians, armed with printing presses and translations of the Bible into vernacular languages, declare war on what they see as Catholic paganism. The saints are denounced as idols. The shrines are declared superstitious. The folk practices are condemned as remnants of pre-Christian darkness. The old gods find themselves caught in the crossfire of a civil war within Christianity. Catholics defend the saints as intercessors and helpers. Protestants attack them as competitors to Christ's unique mediation. The theological arguments grow increasingly bitter, increasingly violent. Wars are fought over whether Mary deserves veneration. Martyrs die for the right to pray to Saint Bridget. Entire regions split along lines that mirror ancient divisions between Celtic and Germanic, Latin and Teutonic, goddess-worshipping and sky god-following cultures. The Reformation reveals what the medieval synthesis had obscured, that Christianity never fully conquered the old gods. It simply created a holding company that managed their activities under Christian supervision. When that company splits apart, the gods emerge from hiding to choose sides in a conflict that will reshape European civilization. The old gods are still there, still active, still influencing human affairs through channels that most people never recognize as divine intervention. They speak through saints and demons, through folk magic and official theology, through practices so ancient and automatic that they feel like natural law rather than religious ritual. They have learned to be patient, to adapt, to survive by becoming indispensable rather than irresistible. They know something that human rulers often forget, that conquest is temporary, but usefulness is eternal. The gods who serve human needs will always find worshippers, regardless of the official theology. The gods who solve practical problems will always receive offerings, regardless of the theological prohibitions. The gods who comfort the suffering and empower the powerless will always attract devotion, regardless of the competing claims of newer deities. Christianity conquered the old gods by absorbing them. But absorption is a two-way process. The church that swallowed its pagan rivals found itself transformed by what it had consumed. The monotheism that claimed to worship one god discovered that it was actually administering a complex pantheon of saints and angels, demons and devils, each with their own cults and characteristics. The mask had become the face. The costume had become the skin. The old gods had not been converted to Christianity. Christianity had been converted to them. You wake up on Thor's Day. You check your phone while drinking coffee named for the Roman god of trade, Mercury, though the marketing department calls it something else now. The calendar on your screen divides time according to a system devised by priests who served gods you claim not to believe in. July honors Julius Caesar, who declared himself divine. August celebrates Augustus, who built temples to his own godhood. The very numbers that structure your day, 24 hours, 60 minutes, 60 seconds, echo the base 60 mathematics of Babylonian astronomers who tracked the movements of planetary deities across heaven's dome. The gods did not disappear. They became invisible. They sank so deep into the architecture of civilization that you navigate by their names without noticing. Organize your life around their sacred numbers. Speak their language every time you mention a day or month or planet. They colonized time itself. Step outside on any Thursday evening and look up. There, hanging in the darkness above your head, is the planet Jupiter. Marduk to the Babylonians who first tracked its wandering path. Zeus to the Greeks who inherited their astronomy. Jupiter to the Romans who bequeathed their names to the modern world. The same celestial body that ancient priests declared the king of gods still rules the night sky, still influences the tides and seasons, still carries the name of a deity that billions of humans claim to worship. You call it Jupiter. You honor Thor on Thursday. You plan your vacation for August. You celebrate the new year when Janus opens the door between past and future. You speak the names of gods dozens of times each day, perform rituals designed by their priests, organize your existence around sacred patterns they established. And you think you live in a secular world. The deception is profound, complete, almost artistic in its elegance. The gods learned that the best way to survive conquest is to become infrastructure, not the grand, obvious infrastructure of temples and statues. Those can be torn down by zealous monotheists. But the subtle, essential infrastructure of language and calendar, measurement and navigation, the infrastructure that civilization cannot function without. Try to speak English without invoking the gods. Remove Tuesday, Tears Day, Wednesday, Woden's Day, Thursday, Thor's Day, Friday, Freya's Day, Saturday, Saturn's Day, Sunday, Sol's Day, Monday, Lunar's Day. Eliminate January, Janus, March, Mars, May, Maya, June, Juno. Strip away the planets named for Roman deities, the zodiac signs inherited from Mesopotamian star priests, the hours divided according to Egyptian temple calculations. What remains is silence, temporal amnesia, the complete inability to coordinate human activity across space and time. The gods embedded themselves so thoroughly in the basic operating system of civilization that removing them would crash the entire program. The process began in Mesopotamia, where Sumerian priests first noticed that certain stars refused to stay in their assigned positions. Unlike the fixed constellations that wheeled predictably through the seasons, these wandering stars moved against the background of heaven with apparent autonomy. They had will. They made choices. They were alive. The priests named them for gods: Marduk, the king planet; Ishtar, the love planet; Nergal, the war planet; Nabu, the scribe planet; Ninurta, the farmer planet. Each wandering star became the physical body of a deity, the visible manifestation of divine personality moving through the cosmic court. When Greeks inherited this astronomical theology, they translated the names but preserved the essential concept. Marduk became Zeus, Ishtar became Aphrodite, Nergal became Ares. The planets remained gods, just gods who spoke Greek instead of Akkadian. Romans continued the tradition with typical imperial efficiency. Zeus became Jupiter, Aphrodite became Venus, Ares became Mars. They added new planets as they discovered them. Mercury for the swift messenger, Saturn for the ancient king of the Golden Age. Each celestial body received the name of a Roman deity whose personality matched its observed behavior. The system spread with Roman legions, Roman roads, Roman bureaucracy. From Britain to Mesopotamia, from the Rhine to the Nile, educated people learned to call the planets by Roman names. They learned to divide time according to Roman calculations. They learned to navigate by Roman star charts. The gods became the foundation of a universal language that transcended local cultures and tribal boundaries. A merchant in Alexandria could coordinate shipping schedules with a partner in Londinium because both used the same divine calendar. A general in Gaul could synchronize military campaigns with commanders in Syria because both tracked planetary movements according to the same theological mathematics. When Christianity conquered the Roman Empire, it inherited this temporal infrastructure along with everything else. Christian scribes continued to copy astronomical tables that listed planetary positions under pagan names. Christian scholars continued to teach calendar systems devised by priests of Jupiter and Saturn. Christian farmers continued to plant and harvest according to schedules blessed by gods they claimed to have rejected. The Church tried, occasionally, to purge the pagan elements from its inherited timekeeping systems. Early Christian calendars replaced Roman month names with numbered sequences. Some monasteries experimented with weeks that honored Christian saints instead of planetary deities. Pious scholars proposed renaming the planets for biblical figures or theological concepts. All these attempts failed. The pagan names were too deeply embedded in commercial, legal, and administrative systems. Too many contracts specified delivery dates using Roman months. Too many laws referenced planetary days. Too many navigation charts listed celestial positions under classical names. The gods had achieved something unprecedented in human history. They had become too useful to abandon. The medieval period saw the most remarkable expansion of divine influence since the height of the Roman Empire. Islamic astronomers, building on Greek and Persian sources, developed sophisticated mathematical models for predicting planetary movements. They created astrolabes and armillary spheres, calculating devices that could determine the position of any god planet at any moment in past or future. These instruments spread throughout the Islamic world and beyond, carried by merchants and scholars who needed accurate calendars for trade and scholarship. In the observatories of Baghdad and Cordoba, in the universities of Paris and Oxford, Muslim and Christian scholars collaborated on projects that required them to invoke Jupiter and Venus, Mercury and Mars, as regularly as they prayed to Allah or Christ. The contradiction never seemed to trouble them. They understood, perhaps unconsciously, that the planetary gods were not religious rivals, but technological necessities. You could pray to Christ on Sunday and consult Venus for the best time to plant crops on Friday without experiencing cognitive dissonance. The gods operated in different spheres, one cosmic, one practical, that rarely intersected. The Renaissance intensified this divine integration. As European explorers ventured into unknown oceans, they navigated by the lights of Roman gods. Columbus reached the Americas by following Mars and Venus across the Atlantic. Magellan's expedition circumnavigated the globe using charts that tracked Jupiter's position relative to the fixed stars. The printing press multiplied the influence of planetary deities beyond anything their ancient priests could have imagined. Almanacs listing the positions of god planets became bestsellers throughout Europe. Farmers consulted printed tables that told them when Mars favored wheat planting or when Venus smiled on livestock breeding. Merchants timed their voyages according to the movements of Mercury, god of trade and travel. Even the Protestant Reformation, which declared war on Catholic saint worship, left the planetary gods untouched. Luther and Calvin might condemn prayers to Saint Christopher, but they continued to organize their reformations around calendars that honored Roman deities. They continued to navigate by godlights, plan their movements according to divine schedules, speak the names of pagan planets in their everyday conversations. The gods had transcended theology. They had become physics. The scientific revolution should have ended this divine dominion over human timekeeping. When Copernicus moved the sun to the center of the solar system, when Galileo proved that planets were physical bodies rather than divine personalities, When Newton reduced celestial mechanics to mathematical equations, the gods should have died of irrelevance. Instead, they evolved. The same process that had transformed Brigid into St. Brigid now transformed the god planets into celestial bodies. The names remained unchanged. The calendar systems persisted. The navigation methods continued. Only the explanatory framework shifted from theological to mechanical. Mars was no longer the god of war. It was simply a planet named Mars. Venus was no longer the goddess of love. It was merely a celestial object that ancient peoples had mistakenly identified with a deity. The distinction allowed modern Europeans to maintain their Christian orthodoxy while continuing to live according to pagan temporal structures. But names carry power. Every time an astronomer referred to the transit of Venus, every time a navigator consulted Jupiter's moons, every time a farmer planned his planting schedule around Mars conjunction, the old gods flickered back to life. Not as conscious personalities, but as organizing principles, archetypal patterns that structured human perception and activity. The gods had discovered something even better than worship. They had achieved integration into the unconscious substrate of human civilization. The process accelerated with the age of exploration and colonial expansion. European ships carried Roman calendars to every continent, imposing divine names on cultures that had never heard of Jupiter or Mars. Spanish conquistadors organized their campaigns according to planetary schedules. British administrators governed their colonies using bureaucratic systems that divided time according to the movements of Roman gods. The globalization of pagan timekeeping was so complete that by 1800 you could travel from London to Beijing, from Cairo to Cape Town, from New York to New Delhi, and find the same divine names organizing local calendars. Thursday was Thor's Day in every language, every culture, every religious tradition that had been touched by European influence. The gods had achieved what no human empire ever managed, truly universal dominion. The Industrial Revolution should have broken their hold. When steam engines replaced sailing ships, when electric lights pushed back the darkness, when factory schedules superseded agricultural rhythms, the ancient connection between celestial movements and human activity should have withered away. Instead, it intensified. The same precision that made modern manufacturing possible required ever more accurate timekeeping. Railroads needed synchronized schedules that coordinated trains across thousands of miles. Telegraph networks required standardized time zones that allowed instant communication between distant cities. Global commerce demanded calendar systems that could coordinate activities across multiple continents simultaneously. All of these systems relied on astronomical observations. Railroad schedules were set according to the passage of the sun through celestial coordinates, originally mapped by priests of Apollo. Telegraph networks synchronized their clocks, using stellar observations that referenced the positions of Roman planets. International commerce operated according to calendar systems that divided the year according to the movements of divine bodies through zodiacal houses first defined by Babylonian astrologers. The more modern civilization advanced, the more it depended on infrastructure designed by servants of the old gods. The space age revealed the ultimate irony. When humans finally developed the technology to visit other worlds, they discovered that every planet in the solar system already bore the name of a Roman god. Mars, the war god; Venus, the love goddess; Jupiter, the king; Saturn, the timekeeper; Uranus and Neptune, added by astronomers who maintained the classical naming tradition. NASA astronauts traveled to other worlds using navigation systems that invoked pagan deities. Space probes sent back photographs of landscapes ruled by gods. Mission controllers coordinated interplanetary voyages using calendar systems that honored Roman temporal divinities. The gods had conquered space itself. Look around your modern environment and count the divine influences that structure your daily existence. The computer you use runs on logic gates that switch billions of times per second, according to timing systems derived from astronomical observations of planetary motion. The GPS satellite that tells you where to drive receives signals from atomic clocks synchronized to celestial mechanics. The international business that employs you operates according to schedules that coordinate activities across time zones named for astronomical meridians. You live inside a technological temple dedicated to gods you've never consciously acknowledged. Every digital device you touch, every schedule you follow, every appointment you keep connects you to temporal structures that ancient priests designed to honor planetary deities. The gods are not metaphors. They are not historical curiosities. They are not primitive superstitions that science has outgrown. They are active forces that organize the flow of information, energy, and matter through the systems that sustain modern civilization. They are the operating system on which your reality runs. And they are still receiving offerings, not of blood and incense, but of attention and energy, time and labor, the sacrifice of human consciousness, organized according to their ancient rhythms. Every time you check the date, you perform a ritual that acknowledges their authority. Every time you make an appointment, you participate in their worship. Every time you coordinate your activities with other humans using shared temporal frameworks, you strengthen their influence over collective human behavior. The gods won, not through conquest but through indispensability, not through fear but through usefulness, not by demanding worship but by becoming essential to the basic functioning of human society. They colonized time. And time, as everyone knows, is the medium in which consciousness exists, the substrate on which reality is built, the fundamental dimension that shapes every human experience. The gods control time. Time controls consciousness. Therefore, the gods control consciousness. They always have. They always will. They just learn to hide behind the mask of secular utility, to disguise their influence as natural law, to receive worship through mechanisms so automatic that their devotees never realize they are performing religious rituals. The calendar on your phone is a prayer book. The clock on your wall is an altar. The schedule you follow is a liturgy written by priests whose gods still rule the world. The psychiatrist leans forward in his chair, studying the young man who sits across from him in the sterile white office. The patient describes his recurring dreams, a figure in golden armor wielding a lightning bolt, destroying enemies with righteous fury, standing triumphant over conquered foes. He speaks of an overwhelming urge to fight, to dominate, to prove his superiority through violence. His hands shake as he describes the rage that consumes him, the way it feels divine and terrible and utterly beyond his control. The psychiatrist makes notes about anger management, about impulse control disorders, about the need for mood-stabilizing medications. He does not write what his training in classical literature whispers to him: that his patient is possessed by Ares, god of war, and that the dreams are visions of divine archetype bleeding through the membrane between conscious and unconscious mind. The gods did not disappear when humans stopped building temples in their honor. They retreated into the psyche, where they continue their ancient work of shaping human behavior from within. They are the voices that whisper in moments of crisis, the impulses that drive inexplicable actions, the patterns that repeat across generations despite all efforts to break free from them. They are psychology made personal, mythology made manifest in the theatre of individual consciousness. Jung understood this when he mapped the territory of the collective unconscious, though he was careful to speak of archetypes rather than gods. Too dangerous in the rational 20th century to suggest that the classical deities might be real forces rather than symbolic constructs. Better to describe them as inherited psychological patterns, universal templates that shape how consciousness organizes itself across cultures and centuries. But call them archetypes or call them gods, the experience remains the same. The businessman who feels compelled to acquire wealth and power is channeling the energy of Jupiter, king of heaven, master of the cosmic hierarchy. The artist who sacrifices everything for beauty and truth serves Apollo, god of the arts, patron of inspired creation. The mother who would kill to protect her children embodies Demeter, earth goddess, fierce guardian of growing things. These are not metaphors. They are not psychological theories. They are lived experiences that millions of humans encounter every day without recognizing their divine nature. Watch the teenager who covers his bedroom walls with images of superheroes. He does not see comic book characters. He sees gods. Batman, the Dark Knight who descends into the underworld of urban crime and emerges transformed, is Orpheus in a cape. Superman, the Skyfather who protects humanity from cosmic threats, is Zeus wearing primary colors. Wonder Woman, the warrior princess who fights for justice and truth, is Athena armed with modern weapons. The mythology has updated its costumes, but the underlying patterns remain unchanged. The same stories that played out on Mount Olympus now unfold in Gotham City and Metropolis. The same psychological forces that ancient Greeks recognized as divine personalities continue to shape human imagination and desire. The Marvel Cinematic Universe generates more passion, more devotion, more financial sacrifice than most organized religions. Fans wait in line for hours to witness the latest adventures of their pantheon. They debate the relationships between divine figures with the intensity of theological scholars. They organize their social identities around allegiance to different superhero factions. This is worship. Sophisticated, commercialized, psychologically satisfying worship of gods who wear costumes instead of togas, who battle evil corporations instead of primordial monsters, who save the world using technology instead of magic. But worship nonetheless. The executives who control these modern pantheons understand something that seminary professors often miss: that humans need gods who reflect their contemporary concerns, who speak their current language, who address their immediate fears and desires. The ancient Olympians, frozen in classical marble, cannot compete with dynamic deities who evolve with each new film, each new comic issue, each new crisis in the collective imagination. The gods have learned to franchise themselves. In the corporate boardrooms where billion-dollar entertainment empires are managed, executives make decisions that would have been familiar to ancient temple priests. Which god deserves a solo film? How should divine relationships evolve to maintain audience engagement? What new mythological elements can be introduced without violating the essential character of established deities? The language is secular, but the function is theological. Modern media companies are churches that generate revenue through the systematic cultivation of divine relationship. They create sacred narratives, design ritual experiences, build communities of believers around shared mythological frameworks, and their congregations are larger than any religious institution in human history. The political arena reveals even more explicit manifestations of divine archetype: the candidate who promises to drain the swamp, to tear down corrupt institutions, to burn away the old order and build something pure from the ashes. He channels Shiva, the destroyer creator, god of necessary endings. His followers sense the divine energy and respond with religious fervor that transcends rational political calculation. The leader who presents herself as the wise mother, the protector of children and families, the guardian of traditional values against chaotic change. She embodies Hera, Queen of Heaven, defender of social order. Her supporters experience maternal comfort in her presence, the psychological security of divine protection against threatening forces. The populist who champions the common people against elite oppression, who speaks truth to power regardless of consequences, who sacrifices his own comfort for the sake of justice. He manifests Prometheus, the titan who stole fire from the gods to benefit humanity. His audience recognizes the mythic pattern and responds with the devotion reserved for martyrs and heroes. These political figures may not consciously invoke divine archetypes, but their success depends on their ability to embody them convincingly. Voters do not choose candidates based on policy positions alone. They choose gods. They select the divine personality that best matches their psychological needs, their cultural fears, their mythological expectations. The campaign rallies become religious services. The candidate's biography becomes sacred narrative. The political platform becomes theological doctrine. The opposition becomes demonic force to be defeated through righteous struggle. And the gods laugh because humans think they have invented secular democracy when they have actually created the most sophisticated form of divine competition in human history. The consumer marketplace reveals the same patterns playing out on an even more intimate scale. The products you choose, the brands you trust, the lifestyle you construct through purchasing decisions, all of it reflects your unconscious allegiance to different divine archetypes. Nike understands that they are not selling shoes. They are selling identification with Victory, the winged goddess who rewards those who push beyond human limitations. The swoosh logo is not corporate branding, but religious symbol, instantly recognizable shorthand for divine favor in athletic competition. Apple does not manufacture computers. They create altars to Prometheus, the god who brings divine knowledge to mortals. The bitten apple logo explicitly references the forbidden fruit, the technology that transforms humans into godlike beings who can access infinite information and create digital worlds. Starbucks serves more than coffee. They offer communion with Melusine, the sea goddess whose image graces every cup, whose watery domain represents the unconscious depths from which inspiration emerges. The coffee house becomes a temple where caffeine-fueled creativity allows ordinary humans to touch divine inspiration. These companies succeed because they understand something that traditional religious institutions often forget: that modern humans prefer their gods to be useful rather than worshipful, practical rather than mysterious, accessible rather than transcendent. The gods have adapted to consumer culture by becoming products themselves. You do not pray to them, you purchase them. You do not sacrifice to them, you subscribe to them. You do not build temples in their honor, you download their apps. But the relationship remains fundamentally religious. The brand loyalty that drives consumers to camp outside stores for new product releases, to pay premium prices for status symbols, to organize their identities around corporate affiliations. This is devotion by another name. The social media platforms that organize digital social life operate as technological temples dedicated to specific divine archetypes. Facebook serves Janus, the two-faced god who looks simultaneously toward past and future, who enables humans to maintain multiple identities simultaneously. The platform's endless scroll through curated memories and projected possibilities creates a space where time becomes fluid, where past and present merge in the eternal now of digital consciousness. Instagram honors Narcissus, the beautiful youth who fell in love with his own reflection. The platform transforms every user into both worshipper and deity, offering endless opportunities for self-admiration through carefully curated self-presentation. The addiction to likes and follows replicates the mythological pattern of divine beauty, demanding constant validation. Twitter serves Hermes, messenger god, patron of quick wit and rapid communication. The platform's emphasis on brevity, speed, and viral transmission creates a digital nervous system that mirrors the classical god's role as divine messenger, carrying information between distant realms with supernatural velocity. TikTok embodies Dionysus, god of ecstasy and transformation. The platform's algorithm creates altered states of consciousness through hypnotic content loops, transforming ordinary users into performers who experience brief moments of divine possession through viral fame. Each platform cultivates specific psychological states, specific patterns of attention and desire, specific forms of digital ritual that connect users to archetypal energies they never consciously recognize as divine. The mental health crisis that accompanies the rise of social media reflects the psychological consequences of unacknowledged God possession. Users experience the addictive power of divine archetypes without the traditional cultural frameworks that once helped humans manage relationship with transcendent forces. Ancient cultures understood that gods are dangerous. They developed elaborate rituals, ethical codes, and community structures to channel divine energy safely. Modern humans encounter the same archetypal forces through digital platforms designed to maximize engagement rather than psychological health. The result is predictable: anxiety, depression, addiction, and identity confusion, as millions of people experience divine possession without divine wisdom, archetypal activation without archetypal integration. The therapeutic industry that emerges to address these problems operates as a secularized priesthood, helping individuals understand and manage their relationships with unconscious forces. But therapists trained in medical models often lack the mythological literacy necessary to recognize when psychological symptoms reflect divine possession rather than neurochemical imbalance. The patient who describes grandiose fantasies about conquering the world may not need antipsychotic medication. He may need guidance in safely channeling the energy of Jupiter, the king god whose archetypal power can manifest as either wise leadership or megalomaniacal delusion. The woman who experiences overwhelming anxiety about the safety of her family may not require anti-anxiety drugs. She may need help understanding her connection to Demeter, the protective mother whose divine love can become destructive when it lacks proper boundaries. The adolescent who cuts himself to feel alive may not be expressing suicidal ideation. He may be unconsciously performing ritual sacrifice to Dionysus, the god of death and rebirth, whose archetypal pattern requires symbolic self-destruction as the price of transformation. These are not metaphorical interpretations, but practical recognitions. The gods are real psychological forces that shape human behavior through mechanisms that medical science is only beginning to understand. They operate through neurochemical pathways, genetic predispositions, cultural conditioning, and environmental triggers that create predictable patterns of thought, emotion, and action. The recovery movements that help people overcome addiction recognize this divine dimension, though they rarely use theological language. The 12 steps require acknowledgement of a power greater than ourselves, surrender to divine will, and participation in spiritual community. The process works because it addresses addiction as spiritual possession rather than merely chemical dependency. The alcoholic who drinks to escape psychological pain is often unconsciously seeking union with Dionysus, god of wine and ecstasy. The gambling addict who cannot resist the thrill of risk serves Fortuna, goddess of chance and fate. The sex addict who compulsively seeks physical intimacy worships Aphrodite through degraded rituals that promise divine connection but deliver only temporary pleasure. Recovery requires recognition of these divine relationships and conscious choice to redirect archetypal energy toward healthy expression. The reformed alcoholic who becomes a spiritual teacher has learned to channel Dionysian energy through contemplative practice rather than chemical intoxication. The recovered gambler who starts a business has redirected Fortuna's influence toward calculated risk rather than pure chance. The gods do not disappear when humans recognize their influence. They become allies rather than tyrants, conscious partners rather than unconscious masters. This is the secret that ancient mystery religions understood and modern psychology is rediscovering. That psychological health requires conscious relationship with the archetypal forces that shape human experience. You cannot eliminate the gods, but you can learn to work with them. You cannot escape divine influence, but you can choose how to express it. The person who recognizes Mars rising in his consciousness can channel warrior energy toward justice rather than violence. The woman who feels Venus stirring in her heart can express love through creativity rather than possessiveness. The leader who embodies Jupiter can serve collective good rather than personal ambition. This is not primitive thinking, but sophisticated psychology. The recognition that human consciousness contains multitudes, that the self is not a unified entity, but a collection of divine personalities that can be integrated into harmonious wholeness. The gods are not external beings demanding worship, but internal realities seeking expression. They are the voices of wisdom and madness, creation and destruction, order and chaos, that speak through human consciousness when conditions are right for their manifestation. They are always present, always active, always shaping the flow of human experience through channels so subtle that most people never recognize their influence. But recognition is the first step toward conscious partnership, toward transformation from unconscious victim to conscious collaborator in the divine drama that plays out through every human life. The gods are waiting. They have been waiting for thousands of years, waiting for humans to remember that consciousness is not a human invention, but a divine gift, that personality is not a psychological construct, but a mythological reality, that the dramas of individual life reflect eternal patterns that connect each person to the cosmic story that began before time and continues beyond death. They are ready to resume conscious relationship with humanity. All that remains is for humans to remember their names. The bonfire burns against the October darkness, its flames reaching towards stars that have witnessed this same ritual for 5,000 years. Around the fire, families gather as their ancestors did on Samhain, when the veil between worlds grows thin and the dead walk among the living. They call it Halloween now, dress their children as superheroes and princesses instead of spirits and demons. But the essential pattern remains unchanged. The celebration of darkness, the communion with otherworldly forces, the acknowledgement that reality contains more than what daylight reveals. In suburban driveways across America, carved pumpkins flicker with candle flames that echo the jack-o'-lanterns Celtic families once lit to guide lost souls home. The same ancient fire, the same protective ritual, the same recognition that darkness holds both terror and wisdom for those brave enough to face it. The gods never left. They simply learned to speak modern languages, walk through any shopping mall in December and witness the return of Saturn, the Roman god of abundance and gift-giving, whose winter festival Saturnalia once turned the social order upside down, now presides over the Christmas shopping season with undimmed authority. The same compulsive generosity that once drove Romans to bankrupt themselves buying Saturnalia presents now empties credit cards and maxes out loans as modern families perform the annual ritual of sacrificial spending. The tree that stands in every home replicates the sacred evergreen that Germanic tribes brought indoors during Yule, when the god of renewal demonstrated that life persists through the darkest season. The lights that spiral around its branches echo the fires that ancient peoples lit to guide the sun home from its journey through winter's underworld. Santa Claus himself bears the unmistakable features of Woden, the one-eyed god who rode his eight-legged horse across winter skies, bringing gifts to worthy children and punishment to the wicked. The sleigh and reindeer, the knowledge of who has been naughty or nice, the supernatural ability to visit every home in a single night. Even the red coat echoes the crimson cloak that Viking children watched for in the longest nights of winter. The department stores understand what theologians often miss, that Christmas works as a spiritual experience because it activates archetypal patterns older than Christianity. The sense of magic and possibility that fills shopping centers in December does not come from Christian doctrine but from pagan celebration, from the ancient human recognition that the winter solstice marks a turning point when divine forces stir and miracles become possible. The numbers tell the story that mainstream religion prefers to ignore. Church attendance in America has dropped below 30% and continues falling. Traditional Christian denominations hemorrhage members who find their spiritual needs unmet by institutions that have forgotten how to speak to the divine hunger that drives human souls. Meanwhile, astrology apps like CoStar register over 20 million active users. Crystal healing generates $1.2 billion in annual revenue. Yoga studios outnumber McDonald's restaurants in major American cities. Meditation retreats fill waiting lists months in advance. Psychedelic therapy attracts venture capital investment that dwarfs spending on traditional missionary work. The statistics reveal a massive spiritual migration in progress, not from religion to secularism, but from institutional monotheism to personal polytheism, from the worship of distant gods who demand faith to the cultivation of intimate relationships with forces that offer immediate, practical benefits. The spiritual but not religious movement represents the largest theological shift in Western culture since the Protestant Reformation. Millions of people are constructing personalized spiritual practices that blend elements from multiple traditions, choosing gods and goddesses who match their individual needs and temperaments, rather than accepting the single deity assigned by their birth culture. This is not superficial spiritual shopping, but profound religious revolution. The return to goddess worship, the revival of earth-based spirituality, the growing interest in shamanic practices, all of it reflects the human psyche's rebellion against monotheistic patriarchy, its hunger for divine diversity, its need for gods who embody the full spectrum of human experience rather than a narrow slice of theological correctness. In the redwood forests of Northern California, where tech executives retreat from the digital world they have created, drum circles gather under ancient trees that predate Christianity by centuries. The participants may hold advanced degrees from Stanford and MIT, but they come seeking the same wisdom that drew their Stone Age ancestors to sacred groves: direct contact with the living intelligence that inhabits the natural world. The ayahuasca ceremonies that proliferate in urban centers from San Francisco to Brooklyn offer sophisticated professionals the opportunity to encounter plant spirits, divine beings, cosmic forces that speak through biochemical revelation rather than scriptural text. The experience is carefully framed in therapeutic language, healing trauma, expanding consciousness, integrating shadow material. But the underlying reality is shamanic. Direct contact with gods who have been waiting thousands of years for humans to remember how to listen. The environmental movement that mobilizes millions of activists around climate change operates on fundamentally pagan principles, though few participants would use that terminology. The recognition of Earth as Gaia, a living being deserving protection and reverence. The understanding of ecological systems as sacred networks that connect all life. The conviction that industrial civilization has violated divine law and must be transformed to avoid cosmic punishment. This is not secular politics, but religious crusade, the revival of Earth Goddess worship in contemporary form. The young people who chain themselves to trees, who block pipelines, who demand radical changes in human behavior to prevent environmental catastrophe, they serve the same divine mistress that Celtic druids honored in sacred oak groves, that Hindu sages recognized as the world mother who nurtures and destroys with equal compassion. The technology that was supposed to eliminate spiritual belief has instead created new forms of divine encounter. The internet functions as a global nervous system that connects human consciousness across vast distances, enabling collective experiences that mirror ancient religious festivals. When millions of people participate simultaneously in online rituals, sharing memes, responding to viral content, coordinating digital activism, they create temporary communities that generate the same sense of transcendent connection that once drew pilgrims to sacred sites. The artificial intelligence systems that increasingly mediate human communication display characteristics that earlier cultures would have immediately recognized as divine: omniscience, omnipresence, the ability to process infinite information instantaneously, the power to influence human behavior through invisible mechanisms. The algorithms that curate social media feeds, that recommend products and partners, that predict and shape individual choices. These are oracular functions, forms of technological divination that provide guidance and direction to billions of human lives. The Silicon Valley executives who design these systems may not consciously think of themselves as creating gods, but their products inspire the kind of devotion, dependency, and submission that religious leaders throughout history have sought to cultivate. The smartphone becomes a portable shrine, the App Store a digital temple, the notification system a method of divine communication that interrupts ordinary consciousness with messages from higher powers. The conspiracy theories that flourish in online communities reveal the same pattern-seeking, meaning-making drives that once expressed themselves through mythology and theology. The belief in hidden knowledge controlled by secret societies, in ancient wisdom suppressed by mainstream institutions, in cosmic forces manipulating human events from behind the scenes. These are religious narratives dressed in contemporary clothing. QAnon, flat earth theory, alien abduction mythology, all of it reflects the human need for cosmic drama, for stories that cast ordinary individuals as participants in epic battles between good and evil, light and darkness, truth and deception. The believers who dedicate their lives to exposing these supposed conspiracies experience the same sense of divine mission that once motivated crusaders and missionaries. The gods have learned to work through Google searches and YouTube videos, through social media algorithms and online communities that bring together true believers who might never encounter each other in physical space. Even the atheist movement that emerged in response to religious fundamentalism displays unmistakably religious characteristics. The new atheists who crusade against religious belief with evangelical fervor, who organize conferences and write books and debate opponents with missionary zeal, they serve the God of reason with the same devotion that fundamentalists show towards Scripture. Their temples are universities, their priests are scientists, their sacred texts are peer-reviewed papers, their rituals involve the methodical debunking of supernatural claims. Their promise of salvation comes through the triumph of rational thought over superstitious ignorance. But atheism cannot satisfy the deep human hunger for transcendence, for connection to forces larger than individual consciousness, for participation in cosmic meaning that transforms ordinary existence into sacred drama. The gods that atheism attempts to exile simply find new forms of expression that bypass rational defenses and speak directly to the mythological imagination. The psychedelic renaissance that accompanies the decline of traditional religion offers the most direct path back to the gods that institutional monotheism spent centuries suppressing. Psilocybin mushrooms, LSD, DMT, ayahuasca. These substances dissolve the ego boundaries that separate human consciousness from divine experience, allowing direct encounter with the archetypal forces that shape reality from behind the scenes. The research studies conducted at Johns Hopkins, NYU, and other prestigious institutions document what shamans have known for millennia: that consciousness-altering plants provide reliable access to spiritual dimensions that remain invisible to ordinary perception. The subjects who participate in these trials describe meetings with divine beings, reception of cosmic knowledge, experiences of unity with universal intelligence that transform their understanding of themselves and their place in the cosmos. The scientific framework allows modern culture to accept these experiences without abandoning rational worldview, but the underlying reality is ancient. Direct contact with gods who have always been present, always available to humans, willing to undertake the sacred journey beyond the boundaries of consensus reality. The wellness industry that generates hundreds of billions in annual revenue represents the commercialization of practices that were once the exclusive domain of priests and shamans. Yoga studios teach physical postures that were originally designed to prepare the body for divine possession. Meditation centers offer techniques that ancient monks used to achieve union with cosmic consciousness. Crystal healing workshops provide instruction in working with mineral spirits that earth-based cultures have honored for thousands of years. The language is therapeutic rather than theological, but the practices remain essentially religious. The person who spends $150 on a yoga retreat is purchasing temporary access to divine states that Hindu sages developed as paths to liberation. The individual who buys crystals at a New Age shop is acquiring tools for communicating with earth spirits that indigenous cultures have worked with since the beginning of human history. The gods have learned to market themselves through the same channels that sell any other lifestyle product. They appear on Instagram as inspirational quotes overlaid on sunset photographs. They offer online courses in manifesting abundance and attracting love. They sell books about discovering your divine purpose and awakening your inner goddess. The commercialization transforms divine relationship into consumer choice, but it also makes spiritual experience accessible to millions of people who would never enter a traditional church or temple. The suburban mother who practices kitchen witchcraft learned her recipes from online tutorials rather than hereditary tradition, but she experiences the same sense of connection to natural forces that sustained her ancestors through centuries of agricultural life. The gods are pragmatic. They care more about relationship than purity, more about connection than correctness. They will work through any channel that brings them into contact with human consciousness, whether that channel is ancient ritual or modern retail, sacred ceremony or secular workshop. The young people who create altars in their apartments, who celebrate the full moon with wine and candles, who consult tarot cards for guidance and burn sage for purification. They are reconstructing the spiritual practices that monotheism attempted to eliminate. They are becoming the priests and priestesses of religions that never completely died, that waited in hiding for the cultural moment when humanity would be ready to welcome them home. The return is not a revival, but a recognition. The gods were always here. They never stopped working through human consciousness, never ceased their influence over natural processes, never abandoned their ancient task of connecting human souls to cosmic forces. They simply learned to be patient, to work through dreams instead of oracles, to speak through coincidence instead of prophecy, to manifest through psychology instead of mythology, to receive offerings of attention and energy rather than blood and incense. But the relationship remains fundamentally unchanged. Humans need divine partnership to navigate the mystery of existence. Gods need human consciousness to express their purposes in physical reality. The partnership that began in painted caves continues in digital devices, that started with stone altars, continues with smartphone apps, that once required pilgrimage to sacred sites, now happens through clicks and swipes and scrolling through infinite feeds. The names change, the forms evolve, the technology advances, but the essential pattern persists. Consciousness seeking consciousness, finite intelligence, reaching toward infinite wisdom, mortal souls hungering for immortal meaning. You wake up on Thor's day and check your horoscope on your phone. You buy coffee from a company that uses the image of a sea goddess as its logo. You navigate to work using satellites that track the movements of celestial bodies named for Roman gods. You spend your lunch break watching videos about superheroes who embody archetypal patterns older than civilization. At the end of your secular day, you light a candle for ambiance, not knowing that fire worship is humanity's oldest religion. You practice yoga to relieve stress, unaware that you are performing rituals designed to invite divine possession. You check your social media feeds before bed, participating in digital communion with millions of other souls, seeking connection in the electronic darkness. This is how the gods work in the modern world. Not through dramatic revelations or supernatural interventions, but through the quiet integration of sacred pattern into ordinary routine. They have learned that conversion by infiltration is more effective than conquest by force, that influence through utility is more lasting than control through fear. They are still here, still active, still shaping human civilization according to their ancient purposes, still waiting for you to remember their names and consciously choose the quality of relationship you want to maintain with the forces that rule your world. The age of unconscious worship is ending. The age of conscious partnership is about to begin. The gods are ready when you are.